We're here today with my friend Bruch, who's a botanist and actor by training, but loves plants and loves mushrooms.
Yes.
So Bruch is going to show us his collection and answer some of our questions.
I'm excited. I never get to show these off, so I'm excited. I hope you can see them. The lighting is, it's hard backlit, but it's good for the plants. It's just not good for us. So
How long have you been growing plants?
I started when I was a kid. I probably was 5 or so. It was something that my family always did, and there were certain plants like the Beefsteak Begonia that I'll show you. I've had one of my African violets since I was 15. What else have I had a long time? Some of the orchids I've had a pretty long time, 10 years or more, 20 years in some cases. When I moved to New York, I sent a lot of them to botanic gardens and to different friends. And since then, I've been asking for a cutting back to have them back. And people have been really nice about that. And so I have a lot of my core collection back. So yeah, I've just been doing it a long time. I have an aunt, Judy, who turned 84 on Sunday. And she had a greenhouse attached to her house. And so I used to love visiting her, and we would start different pots of this. And she taught me how to grow things from cuttings and leaves and dividing and repotting and stuff about drainage and soil mixes and fertilizers. And I love her so much that it's just sort of a natural interest that we share. And when I'm doing this stuff, I feel connected to her.
Why is this a good pastime?
I don't know. I think, for me, I live in a city and I don't get out to the woods as often as I would like to. And there's an Asian philosophy that says that spending time in nature is a vitamin for the soul. It actually provides a medical benefit to the mind. And I believe that. I feel much better after I've walked in the woods. And so when I have all these varied, different habited, active growing plants in my house, I feel like it soothes my mind. And I feel a sense of accomplishment keeping them alive. I don't have any kids, there's a dog in the house, but I don't have any pet dogs or anything. And I feel like these plants, I feel like they give back to me their beauty and their the lessons that they teach me and how nature works. And there's also, you're effectively being a parent to the organism, and it rewards you by growing or punishes you by not growing. So I also I'm a member of a lot of Facebook groups and different organizations that share this interest. And I enjoy seeing other people's pictures and posting my own and getting growing advice and sharing what worked for me and didn't. And so there's a communal human aspect to it as well. It's not, I really enjoy showing them off today. I'm excited that somebody cares about seeing them. Okay, so here is my crazy collection of plants. Dun, 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 da, 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 da. And then it comes over here with more here. And some stuff is outside, but that's because at the end of the winter, I have a love-hate relationship with some of the larger plants. They're too big for indoors, but they have to be up here to overwinter. And so I put them outside. So here I have a wall of a lot of Phalaenopsis. This is a Phalaenopsis orchid. These are the kind that you see at the grocery store most often.
Yep.
You can see them. Here's one in bloom.
Yep.
This is a Hoya, which is in the Milkweed family, Asclepiadaceae. And this is another Hoya, different ones.
Do yours bloom?
Yeah, they bloom kind of capriciously when they want. They don't like to be repotted. And all at once I'll notice there's a pile of sticky goo, and then I'll look and, oh, that bloomed. Because the buds, the flowers drop a sticky, sugary juice, I guess, that attracts some kind of insect pollinator. I don't know if you can see down into this terrarium. I'll try to. These are my lady slipper orchids, most of them. And actually, let me take the top off so you can see through this. Growing them in a terrarium is not necessarily advisable, but this one has a window and it enables me to keep a higher humidity around them in the winter. And then in the summer, I mostly have the top off. But right now I have a rare species. This is Paphiopedilum volonteanum, and hopefully you can kind of see that it has a bud. Look at that long spike. I mostly grow it for the beautiful leaves. You can see, I'm trying to get it so where you can see the lighting. Oh, there you go. So these are the stunning leaves of this lady slipper orchid. It's from Sumatra, Borneo-ish. And then it has this long flower spike that's been in development for about 6 months.
Wow.
And it threatens to open any day, but it needs humidity to do that. So I keep the top on there. And there's a lot of rare species in my house, which I am a stickler for obtaining them legally, not taken from the wild, but they're seed grown by specialist nurseries that specialize in lady slipper orchids. And I have a couple things in here that are extinct in the wild, but they're seed grown in the millions all over the world. So I pride myself on being able to keep them, hopefully against the day when they can be reintroduced into their wild populations. What else, Patrick? What else should I show?
What else is blooming?
What?
What else is blooming?
Oh, you know what? That will require me to set this down and carefully, here, hold on for 1 second. So this is a real treat, and hopefully you can see it. I'm going to try to adjust the lighting. So this is a lady slipper. It's a monotypic genus, meaning this is the only plant in its genus. And the genus is Mexipedium. And this plant was discovered in the Oaxaca area of Mexico in a limestone seep area, and in about 1981. And there were only 7 plants. And the people that discovered it took a little piece, a cutting of each of the 7. They were probably all the same plant. And in probably 8 years later, a fire swept through the area and destroyed the wild population. But it's grown literally in, millions in flasks. It grows really easily. And this is the first time I've gotten one to bloom. I've had this plant for 5 years. It was a gift. And you can see the flower is the size of a dime. It's very tiny. Let me try to get it in there. Mexipedium xerophyticum. And a xerophyte is a plant that grows in very sere conditions on rocks. This
Very
was grown
dry.
on limestone. Well, but it's funny because I used to think that, but in this case, the spot where it grows is not dry. It has constant seepage. And that's why the plant has been placed back into the genus Fragmipedium, which is a larger genus of South American lady slipper orchids. But it likes limestone. It does grow drier than most lady slippers, and it grows by these, let me see if I use rocks to weigh down you can't really, the light stinks. You can't, let me try lighting this with my phone. Hang on. Let's see. This working? No. Can you see runners, kind of runners down in the pot?
Yeah, the new shoots are on a rhizome or runner.
Yeah, we call that a stolon, and we say the plant is stoloniferous. It propagates or spreads by stolons, which are these runners. And then where they touch the medium, they root down, and then, here's a new growth, here's a new growth. This yellow growth was the original growth, and it's getting, you can see there's a yellow leaf there. Yeah. It's getting old, and it was never, a lot of times when these plants change conditions, they have to adapt to the new conditions, the new water, the new light, the new airflow, and they're just not the old growths are not as happy. So I always think that when you see a gorgeous houseplant in a houseplant book, that probably came straight from a greenhouse, was posed for the book, and then put back in the greenhouse. You know, I grow my plants indoors in a windowsill. I don't use lights. And so they're subject to the changing vagaries of condition in my home. So, but Mexipedium xerophyticum, one of the rarest plants in the world, if it still exists in the wild at all, I'm not sure, but it's fairly common in lady slipper cultivation, and I love it. I'm really thrilled to see this little tiny bloom. And it's just so strange and exotic.
How long does that stay in flower?
You know what? I don't know. It's a multifloral, meaning that as this bud drops off, another one will take its place. And I've heard that they can stay in bloom for up to a year, one by one by one, sequential blooming. So I won't cut the flower stalk off, that's for sure. Mexipedium xerophyticum. And this plant would be, it was a gift to me, but they sell for about $100 per growth. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 growths. I would never sell it though. I mean, you know, and I probably couldn't get that much for it anyway, because I'm not a fancy, it's not grown fancily, and it doesn't have a cultivar name. It's just a seed grown specimen that my friend who bought 3 of the original 7 growths and has propagated them in the millions and made a lot of money off it. I was visiting his greenhouse and I just happened to recognize it. I'd never seen one. And he said, well, I think that needs to go home with you. And he gave it to me, which was so sweet. So Mexipedium xerophyticum. What else should I show?
Whatever you want.
Well, I have some orchid seedlings here. This is Paphiopedilum ferianium that I got out of a flask a year ago, and growing them out of flask is kind of difficult and delicate, but they're doing pretty well.
Maybe you can explain the different ways you can cultivate or start a new orchid plant, like the flask versus clones or whatever.
Yeah, so the flasks, orchids, whenever you see an orchid in the wild, you're actually seeing a plant and a mushroom, a fungus. That you don't see the fungus, it's invisible, but the plant has a relationship with the fungus. And we know that each orchid requires, when the seed germinates, it requires a range of fungal species with which to associate. So the fungal spore or the fungal mycelia help to germinate the orchid plant and provide it certain sugars and nutrients that the plant wouldn't otherwise make itself. And so when you're seeing an orchid in the wild, you're always seeing a fungal relationship, not just the plant itself, but a fungal relationship. In cultivation, we bypass the fungal step. In the old days, they used to cultivate plants with nursery plants. There'd be like a mother plant, and you'd sow the seeds into that pot, assuming that the mother plant was hosting the fungus and some of the seeds would sprout. And that's still done on a limited basis today. But to cultivate these in the millions for commercial propagation, we grow them as the seed is fine like dust. There's millions of orchid seeds in a seed pod, and they're sewn onto an agar plate. I don't know, have your students done agar plates?
No, but
okay. So it's a nutrient gel.
Right.
And then that takes the place of the fungus, and the seeds germinate, and then they generate what's called a protocorm. And those are then, as they grow, separated out into another nutrient solution and then another nutrient solution as they grow. And eventually they end up in what's called a flask, which is, it might be a Tupperware, it might be in the old days, it was a glass, like an Erlenmeyer beaker with a narrow neck. Right. And a wide bottom. And the plants grow in that nutrient solution in a sterile condition so that nothing can compete with them or attack them until they get to a certain size and start to develop their own immune system. And then you break or open that flask when they've reached 2 or 3 years in size. And they have roots and they look like a little plant. And then there's a delicate stage where you have to you have to adapt them to outside conditions. And during that stage, you probably lose a lot of the tiniest ones.
Is that what they call a community pot?
Yeah, well, what I have is a community pot. these arrived 16 little plants in a flask, in a Tupperware, basically. And I opened it and washed the nutrient solution off, and then potted them up into this pot with bark, seedling bark. And then for a long time, I kept them covered for humidity and just misted them with very, very pure water. But now these have been out for a year, and they probably doubled in size, and they're probably 4 years from blooming, but that's okay. It tends to be a long game with orchids. Like, you tend to have to invest in them and baby them, and at any stage along the process, you can lose them. And that's why some of them are so expensive, is because they're difficult to grow.
Right. So that's growing from seed. How do you clone an orchid plant, like a particular cross?
Yeah, some orchids can be cloned, and they use, let me find one that can be cloned. So, all right. So this, in this weird tall pot, I'm gonna try to hold it. This is called a tree pot, but this is a Chinese Cymbidium orchid. These have been grown for literally millennia in Asia. They're revered in Asia. They have a wonderful bloom in the spring, and people set these in their front alcove so that when you come over and visit a person in Korea or Japan, often they will have this orchid in bloom in the spring, scenting their front alcove. And so this is Cymbidium encepholium, Chinese or Gensoa Cymbidium, not like the huge Cymbidiums that you wear in a corsage for prom. And to clone this orchid, this is also grown from seed, but to clone this orchid, you would remove it from the pot, and the roots have a tip. And the tip is what's growing fastest. And you would take a little scraping of that tip with the fastest growing cells, and they're sterilized and then put to a nutrient solution, and then spun around and around and around for weeks and weeks. And that spinning action causes them to differentiate into protocorms, just like a seedling. And as those protocorms develop, they're sliced apart with tiny, tiny needle-like instruments. And then those protocorms develop, and those develop, and those develop. And then once you have enough protocorms to make a worthwhile flask, which might be between 25 and say 75 or 100 seedlings, you stop spinning them, replate those into a nutrient solution where there's enough space for them to grow for a year or two. And that's how you end up with a clone, which is genetically, or ostensibly genetically, the same plant as you took the sample from. Although there are exceptions to that, and I'm learning those. But yeah, this plant, this one is grown from seed, but in China, where they're most popular, encepholium is most popular, they're definitely growing these as clones because you want the exact same characteristics of plant and flower. And I don't know if you can see, but this plant is variegated. It has a very slight white margin to some of the leaves, slight striping. Can you see that? Is that white striping?
Okay.
Yeah. And that is a characteristic that's revered among some people who raise orchids in Asia. I'm not as married to it, but a friend was selling this plant, and I just thought, all right, it's been growing indoors. It'll probably do well for me. I'm going to get it. So I bought it off of Facebook. So yeah, the Phalaenopsis that you see in the grocery store are cloned. Most Cymbidiums that you see for sale at Trader Joe's or Kroger sometimes, those are cloned plants. They're all the same. And the advantage to doing that is consistency. You get the same exact flower as you started. You get the same exact plant growth habit that you started with. So that is, does that answer your question about cloning? Yeah.
Do you have a Vanda there?
Do I have a Vanda? I do have Vandas. I have several Vandas. Let's see here. Here's a Vanda. This is one of my blue Vanda coeruleas, Coerulea, which refers to its blue color when it blooms. And I grow it in what I call semi-water culture. And you can see, can you see these root tips?
Yeah. So is there just water in the very bottom, or any water in there?
No, there's actually, the water that's in the very bottom is incidental from misting it.
Okay.
I take and, hang on one second, here we go. So every morning, I take this, there's no potting medium to this. It's actually kind of stuck to the glass, so I don't want to pull it out. But there's no medium in here at all. And I have found that I could not grow these plants in bark or any kind of a mix like most people grow them in greenhouses or in tropical areas. But I can grow them if I just mist the roots down. And this is pure water that I'm doing it with. And you can see the roots turn green when they're wet. That means the velamen, which is the white stuff on the outside of the root, is porous, and it seals off when they're dry, and then when they're hit with moisture, it opens and sucks the moisture in to feed the plant. And I'm hoping you can see the green root. Can you see how there's a green root there? Yeah,
Right.
those are uncapped roots that are growing actively, and they like to stick to the glass and just to anchor themselves, because they serve two purposes. They feed the plant, and they also balance the plant in the vessel. So, and I have discovered that I think they also photosynthesize.
Yeah, if they're green. Yeah.
Yeah. So I can tell when the plant is happiest, the leafy part of the plant is happiest when these leaves are uncapped and growing. In the winter, it takes a long rest, and you very lightly mist it for a long time. I alternate misting this with pure reverse osmosis water, which some people use rainwater, but it's just a very pure water that I have a special filter for, because I'm a nerd. Or sometimes people use rainwater, is really good. And then I alternate with a nutrient solution, different fertilizers that are good for epiphytes, which this plant grows in trees in the Himalayan mountains of India and the Cassia Hills particularly. They say that when this plant was discovered by Westerners, that it grows in these low scrub oaks at the foot of the mountains. And they said it made the mountains match the sky when it was in bloom. So now
is that one you got 2 years ago?
I've now had this plant for 4 years.
Oh, okay.
4 years. And it bloomed last year. It didn't bloom this year, and I'm not sure why. I think it might have needed a break between blooming, because that was its first bloom, and it bloomed its guts out. It had 10 flowers. They were huge blue flowers, like blue butterflies, for months and months. And I think it's just skipping a year. I looked down in here to see if there's any bud action, but no. But that's okay. I enjoy it for what it is. This is Vanda coerulea from the Himalayan mountains.
Is that what you call monopodal?
Yeah, it's got 1 foot. So let me pull a different. So here's a sympodial orchid. Monopodial means it has 1 foot at a time, 1 fan, 1 growth, although sometimes it will send off a new individual growth from the base. Some of these Vandas do that. This is a young plant and it hasn't tried that yet, but monopodial. Phalaenopsis is typically monopodial, although sometimes they will also clump. Patrick, you'll know this plant. This is your Oncidium that you gave me to work on a while ago. And you can see the different bulbs. Here's 1 bulb, or pseudo bulb, we call it, because it's not a real bulb, it's a pseudo bulb. A real bulb would be something like a tulip or a daffodil. 1, 2, here's the nice big fat one that will hopefully bloom. 3, 4, this is the new growth coming, and that will fatten out into a bulb like this eventually. And you can see a lot of aerial roots. Can you see this green root right here?
Oh, yeah.
Like an inch of uncappedness. And this is growing in some bark that anchors it. And I'm hoping it'll bloom because the growths are mature now. And I've had it for, I think I've had this from you for 3 years working on it.
Do those flowers come off the top of the pseudobulb or from the side?
I do not know yet. It's in the Oncidium group, and some come off the top and some come straight out of down in, between the leaves. So we'll see. I keep looking at it, hoping to see a flower spike, but hasn't happened yet. But the plant seems healthy and happy.
Yeah.
And it's got a lot of roots. It's got a lot of aerial roots. So I'm looking forward to this one blooming and seeing what it looks like. I'm going to guess that it's a yellow dancing doll type orchid.
Yeah.
So these are available in the grocery store often too. And when you moved, you just decided
It needed some better care.
Yeah, well, I'm interested in it to see what it does, but I do intend to give it back to you. What else? What else? What else can I show?
Do you have anything that you're rooting, like a African violet or anything else that you're propagating?
Yeah, sure. So here's African violet, and here's Coleus, and here is a begonia. So I have some core plants that I really like. And among them are a couple of African violets that I've had since I was a kid. And here's a leaf of an African violet that, because sometimes African violets tend to rot off at the base when they get old, I always have a leaf going in some water. And can you see there's a little baby plant in there,
yeah.
Which unfortunately it may have gotten too big. I may have to break the glass to pull it out. Will it come?
So you're getting a new
nope,
plant.
It came out.
You're getting a new plant from the base of a leaf.
Yeah, I just put it in water and wait. Can you see the roots in the baby plant? I'm holding two different leaves, and it shot up that baby. This should be potted. I've just been lazy about potting stuff, but this should be put into a soil mix now and grown on into a nice plant. And then I'll show you the old one. Hang on one second. So that's an African violet, and it's actually specifically.
So African violets are unusual that you can actually propagate a new plant from a leaf.
Yeah.
Without requiring a piece of stem.
Yeah, this is the African violet. I've had this since I was 15 years old. But periodically, like I said, I have to repropagate it and grow it into a specimen. But I really love, I saw this at a greenhouse that I was visiting with my Aunt Judy, who's also a plant nerd. And I asked for one leaf, and this has been with me for 30 years.
Those are originally from South Africa or where?
Tanzania.
Okay.
Yeah, they grow in a cool mountainous area of Tanzania. And the genus on this is Saintpaulia. It's like Saintpaulia. And the original ones were brought to this country in like the 1920s and 30s. And then hybridizers bred them for different flower characteristics. I don't have a name on this plant. Typically African violets have a name, like a Johnny's Purple Fantasy or something.
And they're different size. Some of them are smaller plants too, right?
Yeah, I actually, if you hold on, I have some miniatures. So this is a standard. And here's a mini plant that I have growing in this crazy little ceramic frog. Yeah. And I've had this one for a lot of years as well, but you can see how small the leaves are. So the leaves on the big one, leaves on the small one. And this plant has been in bloom all winter as well. There are also minis that grow variegated leaves. You see the pink leaves on that?
Yeah. Is that only with a lot of sunlight or?
You know, it's genetic and it's in the variety, but I lost the tag on this, unfortunately. And it came with some white variegation. You can see the outer leaves are kind of white variegated, but this pink inner stuff, I was surprised to see that. The plant just all at once got happy and decided to do that for me. And maybe it is from getting a lot of light because it's grown in this front window. So. Yeah.
And then the bottom of the other leaves on the other plant are purplish red also, right?
Yeah, they are. They have kind of a pigment to them.
Yeah, and my students should know that that's anthocyanin.
Oh. I never even realized that that's what it was.
That's in the vacuoles.
Huh. So I know anthocyanin pigments are prized among my Japanese wind orchids, but I didn't think of it as
it's also in the flowers there too.
Anthocyanin.
Yeah.
I mean, bluish purple, reddish purple.
Yeah, they vary from pink, reddish to purple and violet.
Groovy. I love it. African violets. Boom. So those are some that you can propagate from cuttings. This is actually a really common plant called Coleus.
Oh, yeah.
It's a bedding plant. And what's funny is, so I grow this outside. It gets to be about 5 feet tall.
What's a
And
bedding plant?
A bedding plant is, they tend to be annual plants, or at least they're grown in our area annually. And they're the kind that you might get in a flat from a nursery, like you'd buy a flat of marigolds and just kind of plant them out in your flower bedding plant.
Oh, okay.
But this is one cultivar of Coleus that gets huge, fiery orange, coppery orange leaves. But in the winter, I take some cuttings and I grow them just to keep them over in water. You can see those roots.
Yeah.
And this is actually cutting of a cutting because the cutting got too spindly. But it's funny that under different conditions, like these green leaves are not at all what the plant looks like out in.
Yeah, I think it's level of sunlight, probably.
Yeah. They're more of the copper color here. But here, this is the exact same plant grown in a slightly different location. And these are cuttings off of this.
Yeah.
All this will go in the ground as soon as it warms up. But you can see that this is sort of more the color.
Right.
It looks redder on the video than it does, but it's like a coppery orange color. And the leaves get big as my hand. And here's the root mass.
When you grow your Coleus outside, you pinch off the flowers or not?
Yes, I pinch off the flowers because I just want the foliage for growing. This here, behind me, we have some of my begonias. This is a species begonia called Begonia heracleifolia nigricans, which means begonia, like the cow parsnip, but black.
Yeah, cool.
That's its name. And then behind it is something your grandmother might have grown, the beefsteak begonia. That's these round leaves here.
Yeah.
And this has been in my family for about 150 years. My great-great-grandmother grew that, and they were grown by Germans, poorer Germans in their kitchens, because they bloom clouds of white flowers in the winter, and having flowers was the ultimate luxury in Germany.
Oh.
So this plant would thrive in a cool, steamy kitchen, rural German kitchen. And then when my ancestors emigrated here, it's from Mexico, so it's a tropical plant. But when they emigrated here, they hollowed out potatoes and they put the rhizome inside the potato and bound it up to keep it moist. And then they started them when they arrived in the New World. And this is related. So this is probably a hybrid begonia called Begonia heterophylla. This one of my aunts has been growing for 60 years. And it's not really sold because it doesn't like to be repotted, but I just think it's a beautiful leaf.
Yeah.
I really, really value the leaf. So I always, just like the African violet, I always have a couple of them going. This is kind of a decrepit looking leaf because it's been growing all winter, but you can see it's got roots and little tiny, the green things at the base are little tiny leaves.
Yeah.
That this could be potted as well, but I probably won't until it's warm enough to put outside. But that'll grow into a nice clump in a year and look like the plant behind me. Wow. So I like to give this away. And the beefsteak.
I'll have to make one of those later then.
All right, you got it. You can have this one. It has your name on it, Patrick. Let's see, what else? What else can I show? Here's a method that's interesting. So let's see. So this is another Cymbidium. And this is a hybrid Cymbidium, and its name is Peachy Keen. But what I want you to be able to see are, do you see those clay balls?
Yeah.
Those are called LECA, L-E-C-A, and I forget what the acronym is for. But this plant grows in these clay balls, and I fill the water, the clear pot up to the top, and then it drains out these two holes. So you fill it up real fast, and then it drains out, and water just sits in the bottom, and the capillary action of the clay absorbs up into the plant, and I feed it with nutrient solutions, and You can see there's roots along there. Let's see. I really wish I did have better lighting. I'm sorry about this. Can you see roots here?
Just barely, yeah.
Green roots. And this is called semi-hydroponic growing. And this plant never did well for me in bark. It almost rotted off. You can still see evidence of the rot here. And I had to treat it with a probiotic solution. And then somebody said, well, try growing it in semi-hydroponics in leca. And that's what I've been doing. And it has just really prospered. It's got 3 new growths, and I'm hoping for some flowers when I put it outside this year. So this is a Cymbidium orchid related to the one that we showed earlier. But this is a hybrid that was a species and grown in leca.
Cool.
So let's see. I'm not sure what else.
We could answer some questions.
Yeah, let's do that. Do you want to read me the question?
Yeah.
Or do you want me to look at them?
I'll read them.
Okay.
So Moni asks this one, what are your recommendations for growing plants indoors? A lot of YouTube and article resources seem to indicate growing one type of plant at a time. What are some groupings that work best to grow together?
Well, I agree with those recommendations, and unfortunately, I don't follow them. I'm a
You
plant,
grow a lot.
yeah, I would call me a plant hoarder, a plant nerd. Like I love growing different, as many different plants as possible. Each one of them interests me and has a story. And the trick with growing indoors is to know your conditions and understand the microclimate of the exact spot where you have that plant.
Especially
If you go to
white
the woods, there are plants that are growing in certain spots and not other spots. And that's because of differences in soil chemistry, humidity, light, air flow. So in my house, I have a southwest window. I have a lot of cactuses and a lot of orchids that grow in bright, bright light, because that's the brightest light I've got. The best lighting all around is an eastern lighting, but then you have to know the intensity of that lighting. You know, obviously light is going to be more intense in the window and less intense the further back you go from the window, and you have to find that balance. So in terms of deciding what to grow in your house, the best way to do it is to go to somebody's house who's having success with a plant and look at their conditions. And then if you want that plant, think about what spot in your house can you recreate those conditions. You know, and it's just a lot of trial and error and moving stuff around and seeing what works and what doesn't. You know, in general, an east window is your best bet. A south window is the second best. West is perfect for some things like cactuses, but it might be too strong depending on the level of intensity and how close you put the plant to the window. Factors like where the heat comes from in Chicago in your winter apartment, there's no plant that can survive for long with hot air blowing on it. Hot, dry air. Not even a cactus can tolerate that. Cold, dry air, within reason, it may be better. But hot, dry air coming from a heater, a lot of times your heater is right along your window. So you've got to do something to direct that heat away from blowing directly on the plants, or you're just going to end up with fried plants.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of factors that go into it. I've always thought that maybe I should start a consulting business of going into people's house and saying, you could grow this here and this here and this here. Because everybody has the fantasy of having their plants look, you know, like Better Homes and Gardens, but it really is kind of a long process of elimination to get that done. I hope that was a helpful answer.
Yeah. So Bona asks, she got 3 questions. What are some tips for keeping soil in pots well drained? Is there any advantage at all to growing plants in clay abundant soil?
Okay.
Are there any guidelines for when to provide plants with fertilizer?
Okay, we're gonna have to do those questions one at a time.
Okay.
That's different
How do
worlds
you
of
keep
question.
a pot well drained?
Okay, so most of us, what we do is, there are exceptions to this, but with almost no exceptions, you do not want to grow a plant in a pot that does not have drainage holes. Usually in the bottom, sometimes along the sides. A lot of orchid pots. Orchids, the roots are adapted to be aerial roots, so you want to keep them moist, but not wet. They can't sit in water with almost no exceptions. So you want, sorry, my voice is still messed up from, you want them to, you want the water to drain all the way through. And in order to accomplish that with soil, typically you'll put some broken crockery and or pea gravel or rocks in the bottom, which serves two purposes. One, it prevents the soil from leaching out. Two, the water won't be right in the soil at the bottom. It won't be holding in a pocket. It'll be separated from the soil by the depth of the rocks. So, and three, it prevents, what do you want to say, like stagnant water from sitting in it. But it also helps weigh the pot down at the base to prevent it from being knocked over. A little extra weight in the bottom, like a weeble, the pot will tend to stay upright. Because when pots dry out, that soil doesn't weigh anything. So the plant grows out the side of it. It could tip it over, but if it's got weight in the bottom, it helps with drainage and keeping the plant upright.
How about growing in clay soil?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. The thing about clay soil is that it has a lot of minerals, and minerals are something the plant needs. And there are some plants that are adapted to growing clay soil that will only grow in clay soil. So I'm trying to think of an example of one of those. Typically indoors, I'm looking around for a clay. I don't think I have anything that grows in pure clay. Yeah, I don't, but there are plants that do. And they're probably succulents from South Africa or the Southwest American desert that are adapted for periodic flooding, but then that clay dries out. And one of the advantages to having a lot of minerals is there's not a lot of organic matter to decay, so it's not as attractive to rot. It's not as attractive to fungal invasion. So that would be one of the advantages to growing in clay. But mostly you would want to, if you have a clay soil, you would want to take that soil and mix it with an organic matter such as peat or coir, coconut coir, or, well, worm castings are the digestive results of what a worm does as it moves through the soil, and it tends to concentrate those minerals. It's an inorganic material, but a lot of people use it as a soil amendment because it boosts the mineral content, but it's friable. It breaks apart easily. And roots typically don't move through clay soil as easily or well as through a soil that's got a rich organic component. So,
how do you know when to fertilize?
That's a good question. It is kind of intuitive, but in general, you look at the leaves, and leaves on a healthy plant are typically going on, and there are vast exceptions to this, but typically going to be a healthy, darker green, like a dark, healthy green. When leaves turn yellow, that's a sign of magnesium deficiency. When the new growths, when the plant is getting enough water and enough light, and the new growths are spindly, it probably means the plant lacks nutrition. It lacks those minerals that are in a fertilizer, and you would want to use that as a cue to fertilize, typically. So weak growth. Now the trick is that the plants can only use the fertilizer if they're getting enough light. So the question becomes, is the weak growth a result of a process called etiolation, which is a sign that the plant is lacking in light and seeking light, and that tends to be a long, spindly, yellow, weak growth. If you've ever started seeds indoors and the light has been weak, the seedling grows very tall and spindly before it produces its new leaves, and that's etiolation, seeking the light.
Yeah.
So you need to decide whether it's etiolation or just a lack of fertilizer. In general, plants indoors do not require a ton of fertilizer. I'm very stingy with it because if you over-fertilize the plant, you can burn the roots and the plant will just, it becomes unable. It's like you having a medical overdose. Like if you took too much, if you took too many vitamins, you could get sick. You know, that's what over-fertilizing does to the plant.
Okay. How do you know when to repot a plant?
Oh, good question. In general, there are some plants that should be repotted every year. My lady slipper orchids require a fresh mix about every year because the mix, it's a bark mix and it breaks down. Their fungal partners in there are digesting the wood, and the plant can't live in that for very long. It doesn't get any nutrients from the wood. The wood is just in there to keep it moist and allow air to get at the roots. So in general, when the mix is the potting mix, if it's soil or anything, kind of gets a sour smell, that's a sign that you should repot. Let's see.
About roots, if it gets root bound?
Yeah, some plants like to be root bound within reason, but then if you notice that the plant is no longer growing strongly or healthfully, or if it looks crammed in the pot, sometimes the roots will just break the pot apart, and that's your signal right there. That'll happen with bigger stuff like ficuses, or like a monstera vine is a common plant that'll just bust the plant apart. Cymbidium orchids will do that to pots. They grow such dense roots, and then you water them. So sorry about my voice here. And then you water them, and they expand rapidly, and the pot just splits because there's no more room for growth within that pot. So, but those should be repotted about every 2 years anyway.
One of the students is moving. Lola was wondering what is a safe way to move plants to a new home?
Yeah, so the keys with moving them are, obviously you want to protect the roots or the leaves as much as possible, but temperature is key. In general, you don't want plants to get a blast of cold air when they've been growing in your temperate home conditions. So you want to wrap them in plastic and then in a box to prevent a blast of hot or cold air on them, and just accomplish the move as quickly as possible. It's vast drops or spikes in temperature are what usually causes the most damage. And a little key tip is avoid watering them for several days or a week or so before they move. It's better to move a wilted plant, because then when you get to the new space, you can water them immediately and they'll perk right up. Plants that are watered tend to be more easily broken because they're turgid.
Or they might be too humid and start to rot if they're closed up.
Well, there's that. If you're shipping a plant or you have to drive across country and it's going to take a week, yeah, that is another point. When people ship plants, they tend to dry them out, take them out of their pot and dry them out first for a day or so that there isn't extra water in there. It does depend on the plant, but I would definitely say dry them out, prevent extremes in temperature, and don't let them get a blast of any kind of, especially winter air.
Arb has a snake plant in a glass terrarium with zinc framing.
Oh.
It seems to be dying where it is touching the zinc. Is there something going on with that?
Yeah, I bet there is. I bet that there's a salt reaction happening. And you sometimes see that in clay pots too, that the salt concentrates in the plant at that spot with the zinc, because zinc is a nutrient that plants need. There are fertilizers that have zinc in them, but too much will poison the plant effectively. So one option would be to buffer that by placing an inert, sort of like a floor tile or a backsplash tile. Just slip that between the zinc pot and the plant and see if that happens.
Some kind of barrier.
Yeah, a piece of rock or something. Or I wouldn't use plastic, only because plastic tends to sort of create a moisture right there, could hold moisture, and that could be a problem. But yeah, moving that growth off of that zinc should probably help.
Okay, M got a shrimp plant last summer, and it stopped blooming after like a week or two. Yeah. And she still has it, but it hasn't bloomed. So it's growing slowly, but kind of skinny and not bushy, and it's more like a vine. How can I grow it? How can she get it to grow better and make flowers again?
It sounds like it needs more light and more food. And what I would do is I would clip off the spindly growth and then put it into a place that's twice as bright as wherever she's had it. Now, I don't know where she's had it. So if she's had it right in her brightest window, that might not be possible. They do well in a sheltered location outside, like a porch. You don't want to put it out in full sun because that'll burn it up. But you want to increase that light and at the same time feed it like a normal plant fertilizer, like a Miracle Grow, and see what happens there. She should notice new growth pretty quickly, but don't put it out yet because it's not warm enough quite yet for that. That's a tropical plant from very humid tropical areas, and I would wait until May 15th or later to put it out.
Okay. Rock is a ceramic artist. He's wondering about using ceramic using ceramic pots for plants. What are some necessary features for a pot to have a plant inside?
Yeah, great question. Hard to answer without seeing the specific ceramics.
But
so
they need the holes in the bottom?
Yes, you definitely want it to have drainage, either along the sides or at the bottom. And there's a lot of different ways to accomplish that. With some plants like orchid pots, you'll see what amounts to a lattice all the way around the pot, plus drainage holes in the bottom. Typically you want, with plant pots, and there are exceptions to this, but you want a pot that breathes. So terracotta, which is your typical clay pot, it breathes naturally, just like a porous stone would, like
right.
the earth would. That's why when you use terracotta pots, you want to soak them overnight in water first so that they absorb the maximum amount of water and have the capillary action in effect when you put the plant in. Otherwise, they're going to draw the moisture out of that soil, and it's going to take a while for that the balance to be struck with terracotta and the soil. Ceramic,
right. So you put orchids in that kind of pot so that it can dry out. It doesn't hold too much moisture, kind of?
It depends on the orchid. There's also, I grow a lot of orchids in clay pot or plastic pots that are tall.
Oh, okay. But what about ceramic? What about glazed pots versus unglazed?
Yeah, the trick with the glaze is that if the pot doesn't breathe, you're running the same risk of stifling those roots as you would with a plastic pot. So you really want the pot to breathe, like good drainage, yeah. Probably watering less frequently, because the glaze it seals in the moisture, versus terracotta that's unglazed, it allows the breathing to happen. There's a Japanese technique that's used for a lot of plant pots, or Japanese Korean, that's called raku, which is a wood-fired, earth-fired glazing that allows glazing but also breathing through the pot. So raku technique is time-honored for growing plants, and you can look up Japanese wind orchids and Japanese Cymbidium orchid growing and see these tall, slender pots that are raku-fired, or just have holes all along the sides that accomplishes some of the same thing in terms of airflow to the roots.
Okay. Lark is interested in getting a fiddle leaf fig tree and wondering how to take care of it so she can do that safely.
Yeah, the fiddle leaf fig is a great houseplant. It's in the genus Ficus. Last year I rescued one from the garbage that I thought it was probably dead, but then the sticks, it was a tall, like 4 feet tall with branches at the top, and the sticks were green when I snapped them. So I thought maybe it'll come back. It took 4 months, but one day I went out there and it had burst into leaf. Like it had just sat long enough and healed itself inside and decided to make leaves. And I gave that to my Aunt Judy, and she has it in her greenhouse, and it's now 14, 12 feet tall. So you want a good soil to start with, a good porous aerated soil, like a good pro-mix or potting soil. Water it when it dries out. So let it dry out and then water it. Let it dry out and then water it. It must have drainage. It cannot sit in water for more than a day. Now, sometimes you see a dish underneath the plants and you water and then you see water in the dish, and that means it's got enough water. And you can leave that for a day because oftentimes the plant's roots will suck that water back up into the plant. But if it's sitting there more than a day, dump it, because you do not want, by and large, you do not want roots sitting in water. Ficus tends to require good light. Then again, it's a balance between the less light, the less water, the less fertilizer. The more light, the more water, the more fertilizer. So I would say you don't want to put it in the darkest corner of your house, But if you have an eastern exposure, you can set it back from the window and just, watch that it doesn't develop yellow leaves. Watch that the leaves aren't browning, which means it's too dry. A lot of people with ficus, they mist them in the morning gently, just psh, 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 a couple few mists to keep a little humidity around the plant. In general, you do with ficus, they're a tropical plant. They're not from the desert, and they want humidity around them. So hopefully that helps. It's an easy plant to grow, but you do have to pay attention to what it's doing and adjust accordingly.
Right. How about things that don't need as much watering would be succulents and cactus. So how often would you water those?
Yeah, so it depends on the size and the species. There are various succulents that tolerate watering just like a regular houseplant. I have some cacti that I've been growing for years and years from seed in my west window, and I do not water them between Halloween and Easter at all. They just sit there. And I recommend that for if you're growing in Chicago or in a temperate area, because they wouldn't be getting water during that time of year in the desert. And then long about April, the Sonoran Desert starts to get, March, April, the Sonoran Desert starts to get rain. So when that starts on bright sunny days, I'll give a little tablespoon of water to each plant. And then so I've been watering them now for, 3 weeks or so since Easter. And then in another, probably May 15th, when there's no danger of frost outside, I'll take them to the sink and drench them, run water all the way through them. And there'll be enough light by then that they can process that water. And then after a couple waterings like that, say every 2 weeks, I water them about every 2 weeks in the summer. I'll feed them with a special cactus fertilizer every 3 weeks all summer. And then I start to taper it down in September. And then by Halloween, they're getting no more water. They're still getting the same light, but no more water.
You put yours out, do you put yours outside in the summer or keep them inside?
No, I keep them inside because you can't control the rain out there.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't want them to get drenched constantly because they tend to rot. Cactuses tend to rot if there's a lot of rain. There are exceptions to that. There are some people that grow cacti perfectly fine outside. We have a couple of native species of cacti that are native to Illinois. They're prickly pears, Opuntia humifisa and Opuntia fragilis. And I grow those outside year round. They sit out there in the snow. They tend to desiccate and get all shriveled in the winter. But then now that it's raining and warmer, they're plumping out. And they're kind of fun to see cactuses growing outside in Chicago.
Cool. Well, thank you, Bruch.
Oh,
all your
okay.
help and advice.
Well, it was my pleasure. I never get a chance to use all this nerdiness. Nobody ever cares about my crazy plants, and so it's delightful. And your students' the students' questions were really good, and I enjoyed answering them. I hope I gave good answers. It's funny how when you've been growing plants for a lot of years, you don't necessarily think about these things. You just sort of know. And there are people that just sort of know stuff about ferns. I don't have good luck with ferns. I don't have good luck with dendrobium orchids. So they're a mystery to me. There are people who grow bonsai indoors that are just, it's mysterious to me how they do it. It's mysterious to me. I would be a total beginner in growing those. So I say, if there's a plant you really love, just pick it out, apply yourself to it. You'll probably kill a bunch before you succeed, but hopefully they're not too expensive. And eventually you'll understand your conditions with your plant and what to do.
Yeah. So people can get plants at lots of places, including Home Depot and their garden center. And
yep. I get stuff at Home Depot all the time. I can't resist it sometimes.
They have orchids too. They have good phalaenopsis.
They sure do. They really do. Yeah, we all get sucked into that sometimes. You just see something that's so beautiful, you have to have it. My stuff tends to be on the uglier side. I'm more into species, but I'm not immune to seeing a stellar set of blooms and just saying I have to have that in my life. So that's how you end up with this crazy collection.
Yeah, well, it's nice.
Well, thanks. Thanks, Patrick.
Okay,
You've always been appreciative.
I'll see you soon.
Okay, take care.